Now I'd like to invite all the morning session speakers here to join a panel. I have some questions myself, but I'm also happy to give the mic to anyone in the audience as well. But yeah. I was thinking, hearing about your all of your presentations and being involved in energy policy discussions myself as well. And as Jukka showed, actually in Finland, people are pretty accepting of nuclear power. And even though there is the public image problem still, but what I'm always surprised is that experts on many fields in policy and finance, for example, are quite eager to write out nuclear, or they don't, it's left out in a sense. So what I'm asking you guys, do you think this is the case? Why, and actually should we focus on changing the public image or correcting this kind of within the field of different expertise, let's say finance sector or energy policy analysis or something? So which two, or is it a trade-off? And yeah, Kirsty, you can start.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, good question. So I love the idea that we need to stop burning stuff. That should be our objective. You know, we talk about decarbonization, and you know, really we just need to stop burning stuff for mobility and for power and for heat. It's the end of the combustion age, hopefully. So how much nuclear do we need, and why is it not included? Well, James Hansen, the climate scientist, worked out that we might need something like 4,000 reactors by mid-century, which is a tenfold increase in what we have today in order to replace all of our fossil fuel infrastructure and meet rising global energy demand. But in order for that to happen, we're going to need to build trust and confidence. We will need to drive down costs as well, but actually, unless there's investor confidence, unless there's public confidence, and unless there's a political mandate for that technology, then it's not going to happen. And the way that we will do that is by establishing relationships, by getting into the conversation, by being included, building relationships, building coalitions, and delivering some projects.
Yeah, the institutional reticence is global, in my experience. It's absolutely prevalent in Australia. Study after study, finding a reason not to. Typically, the excuse used is it falls just beyond the time frame that we were thinking because it might take 10 years or more. I've been hearing that now for 20 years in Australia. Seriously. If we had acted, we could now have it. And so I think we do need to pressure our institutions directly for this inclusion, because it's often leading the conversation. As an example, in one of our papers to be published, where we were trying to do some cost modelling of different energy sources, we looked at the last time it was included in Australia. And there's a headline number for what the levelised cost of electricity is. But when we looked under the number at the assumptions, we found 3 of the assumptions were unsupportable. A 10% discount rate, an 83% capacity factor, and a 30-year amortisation period. All wildly inappropriate for energy investment and just wrong on the basis of the rest of the literature. And it nearly doubled the levelised cost of the electricity. And so unless we are riding our institutions very hard about how they are treating these energy sources, and are we treating them even-handedly, and are we being clear about the assumptions that we're bringing to the table, you can keep shoving it off the side easily. There's a million ways to do it. So we need to get better at knowing what they're doing with it, demanding that it's in, and seeing transparency in how it's being treated. Because I could tell you it's cheap, or I could tell you it's expensive. The difference between a 3% discount rate on nuclear and a 10% discount rate on nuclear is huge. So we need to decide upon what basis are we planning. You know, and my brother, who is an analyst who worked with me on that, said, you know, whether you are thinking as an investor or a parent, a mother or a father of children, will alter very much whether you think the discount rate should be high or low. And that's a really relevant point of view that we have to bring to that conversation.
Just add we mentioned about public confidence. I think that's a basis for development and operation of nuclear. But I think the other thing we want to mention is about the political and policy aspect. Because nuclear energy is such a long time and commitment, you require a stable political environment. So you take UK as an example. For UK to have the new build program, there was political consensus within the major party. So even though we have 10 years now since our in UK energy review, and we haven't really started on our new construction program, there have been a stable political consensus. So not saying that there shouldn't be an appropriate debate about nuclear energy within the mix, but I think having a sensible, a transparent nuclear political debate is as important as getting public confident acceptance. I think that's the other point. And you can see case studies in Asia where nuclear become a political issue, and you get swings, huge swing of different policy and public acceptance, and you can't really have a sensible nuclear program on that. And going back in terms of about nuclear being a potential low carbon source, but before Fukushima, you look at the IEA projection. IEA projection 2008, 2010 anticipated 25% of the global electricity coming from nuclear. And there was even a scenario anticipate potentially 40% of the electricity from nuclear, because at that time there wasn't certainty of what the alternative would be. But obviously since Fukushima, it seems that nuclear as a potential energy source been just dropped off the radar, and not having both in as a potential energy source been just dropped off the discussion.
It's dropped.
The decision-making dropped. And we've all got influence over it. It's all the decision-making. It's an active decision.
Drop it. Jukka Rauli, you want to add something to that?
I would like to add on that trust is something that can be gained only through experience, and it will take some time to build trust. And it's obvious that the trust of investors or financiers at the moment is not very high, because actually many nuclear projects have been prolonged very much. They have become much more expensive than was originally considered. And then there is a huge, not only nuclear policy risk, but energy policy risk of all kind of market failures or subsidies or whatever that will change the market even over the project. So it's a more complicated issue than just to have some verbal training with authorities or the stakeholders. Of course, a lot of information is needed, but also good examples are needed. There are good projects in the world at the moment, and they should be raised up. And also what you need is, what we have learned in Finland is that you need to have a very good confidence between the radioactive authority and the branch itself, the nuclear field. So it is very important that you have know-how also in the authority side, and that needs to be built up also. It is not obvious that it's there.
I'll have the last word again on this. a while ago I read a book that was written in the 70s about nuclear energy. And in it I read that the majority of the nuclear industry decided to shut up about itself as a PR strategy. 40 years have gone. It's not working. Evidently. I mean, and another sort of perspective is that they have been, when they have been speaking about nuclear energy, they have been giving you engineer speak, like technical details, and all the pictures and in the slideshows have machines, shiny machines. There's not a person anywhere. Clearly, when you do talk about, you need to talk about something else than how you made a safety improvement and then give the technical details of that improvement. You need to have people talking with people. Yeah.
Yeah, Kirsi, go ahead.
I think that the nuclear industry tends to beat itself up a lot, and you know, is quite defensive and hides away. But you know, if you want to know what success looks like, it's nuclear. If you want to see a real world example of deep decarbonization, of actually moving from, you know, from burning stuff to being clean, then, you know, look at your neighbors. They did it the fastest, and it's actually the only real world example that we have of modern economies, you know, continuing to be successful, growing their economies, creating jobs, driving down the price of electricity, and getting off fossil fuels. You know, Sweden, Switzerland, France, you know, the only countries, the only modern economies that have achieved the first step on the path to decarbonisation, which is to have, you know, the two-step plan, clean up your electricity generation, and then focus on heat and transport. Finland really could be world leaders here in achieving the goal, affordably, reliably, clean. That's what success looks like. Let's hear that from the nuclear people.
Yeah, that's the kind of talk we like to hear in Finland. That we'll be the world leaders and such. Floor up for a question from the audience. Yep.
Yes, Mikko Pihilanko from Finnish Nuclear Society Young Generation Network. So, question about public acceptance. So what has been done different in UK? Because you have 3 huge projects, Horizon, Nugen, Hinkley Point C. So there's a huge difference between other European countries. And about public acceptance also, we could say something about the nuclear waste.
I'll very quickly respond on the UK because I'm talking a lot, so I'll create some space. Great. Yeah, so just on nuclear, on the UK, so it's quite a pragmatic society, I think, generally. We have pretty good science communication between our scientists and our media, which drives up the quality of the reporting, which that's really important as well. We've had some successful coalition building between the nuclear industry and renewables and carbon capture and storage, where those industries, you know, joined up together as the low carbon industries, and therefore gained, you know, a lot of support from, you know, constituencies that those technologies sometimes find it hard to reach. So we have good support on the left. And we have good support on the right. I don't know if we're that politically stable at the moment.
I'll just speak quickly on waste because, funnily enough, Australia is currently going through a domestic process for low and intermediate level material from our research sector. And we don't yet have a centralised national facility for that. We are really behind best practice, and we're trying to address that. And it's going really remarkably, strangely quite well. And it's kind of quite circular to be here in the Nordic region speaking about this because we adopted many lessons that we'd observed here to what we started doing in Australia. And I was part of the siting panel to try to improve the way we were doing this. I'm going to be speaking about this on Tuesday, I think in quite a bit more detail. But a few things we've seen is having a voluntary siting process has been an absolute game changer, is the Australian expression. I don't know if it's a common idiom, but it has changed the way this has been approached by giving anyone who owns land in Australia anywhere the opportunity to apply and only accepting voluntary nominations. And we were taking bets, you know, will we get 5? Maybe we'll get 10, you know, double figures was pretty brave. And we got 25 applications from around the country. So by taking taking away obligation and substituting it with opportunity has worked quite well. And it has remained that way. No one has felt forced. Everyone has been aware that they can move on. Some sites have moved forward. In moving forward, sites have been promised a fund merely for participating to this point. So we're talking about smaller towns, lower employment, and they are being rewarded and thanked already on behalf of the country for staying with the process this far. And it's building remarkable goodwill to the point that there was only one site left and another site fought their way back on to the process. So it is not the mystery you think it is, or that we've always thought it is. It's actually just good practice. And there's a lot of data and evidence about there for what that good practice is. We've just got to apply it.
King, go ahead.
Just address about, I think, public acceptance. From my point of view, building trust is trust in the, I think it's important institutional arrangements. Yeah. So that means institutional trust of the operator, they can operate the plant efficiently and engage with the public. Trust in the regulator, safety regulator, they're independent. And so I think that's what, in my view, the public look for. There are independent way they can view that the whole industry are operating sensibly and transparent and engage in that way. And I think that's quite important. And you can see elements of those institutional missing maybe in other country. That's where it fails. And regarding waste, in UK, in my view, addressing the waste problem, I don't think it's a barrier or final disposal in UK. It's a barrier to nuclear development. For example, in UK, we haven't decided on a final repository yet, not unlike Finland, but that can inhibit both politicians or progressing with the new build program, because this is I think public acceptance, a political issue rather than a technical issue.
I think it's really important to treat it as very important. I think it's very important to distinguish with waste as being something that is very important to do well, not urgent to do tomorrow. You know, take the time and get it right, and people are a lot more trusting of that than a sense of urgency on that.
In you know, all the research that we've done in the UK shows that people really don't think or know that we have a waste problem. Actually, they don't. A lot of people don't even know we have nuclear power, right? So, this is a completely manufactured idea, constantly reinforced by the industry. Again, beating itself up, banging on about waste, having whole conferences with programs dominated by, you know, the topics of safety and waste, and all they're doing is reinforcing the idea that this is an issue. And I mean, Rowley, do you want to say something a little bit about the way that we handle waste?
Yeah, yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, people often fear nuclear waste, and I have been having discussions about nuclear power. Then it's one of maybe the two main opposition points is that we're going to have waste that's going to be dangerous and harmful for at least 100,000 years or maybe millions of years. But that's not true. If you look at how radiation works, how it decreases, what it actually does. I mean, after it has cooled down and you put it in a metal box to cool some more, you can stand there beside the metal box and not get anything. I mean, after maybe 1,000 years, the nuclear waste, the high-level waste, the used fuel, it can be harmful only if you practically eat it. And even then it's mostly harmful because it's a toxic metal, not because of the radiation that much. So there's a lot of unnecessary fear that I actually blame the industry. Yeah, I mean, there's this point that when I say that, okay, it's not that dangerous, then somebody can say that, yeah, but the company says that you still need to bury it a half a kilometer beneath the earth. It must be the most dangerous subject in existence. But it's basically assuming that there can be no harm to any living being ever by the waste, and that's a ridiculous assumption. I mean, I can get much more dangerous substances from the local gas station than like a spent nuclear fuel that's had a reasonable time to cool down.
Yeah, don't eat your nuclear waste.
Yeah, don't eat it. At least don't eat much.
Yeah. Or wait a couple of thousand years for it. It sounds like we're kind of obsessed with the level of safety with nuclear energy. But now let's give the floor to the undisputably most convincing voice in the audience.
Oh, thank you. Well, I was just noticing we got 3 founders up there of some environmental. Rauli, are you not including yourself? You were on the ground floor of the. Okay, all right. You just look confused. Of various environmental groups, NGOs here are working on this, and I just wanted to hear from each of you what was the impetus behind founding those organizations to work on this issue?
I'll just give you one word: frustration. Maybe a second word is the lack of progress that we've been having with environmental issues and climate, and clearly it was not working, so I thought that we should do something different and search for the evidence-based solutions that could work that we have overlooked. That was a long one word.
Okay, so my one-word answer would be that there was a vacuum, and there was just it had to be filled. Somebody had to be out there that wasn't from the industry or politicians, making the case for nuclear from a humanitarian and an environmental perspective.
Yeah, quite similar with Kirsty and directly in the Australian experience, seeing that decisions were being made consistently over a period of decades, not on the basis of evidence, not on the basis of discussion. It's politics. And the anti-nuclear environmental groups were really good at it. Yeah, we have to give them credit. They were doing it really, really well, consistently, showing up, making a case, putting in the time and resources, and it just wasn't good enough anymore for pro-nuclear environmentalists to be opinionated. Being opinionated doesn't actually achieve anything. Feeling strongly about something and having an argument on Twitter doesn't achieve anything. No, it can achieve some things, but we were not a movement. We were not a movement. And what we were fighting was a movement with decades of heritage, lots of experience and resources, and they got stuff done. They were getting stuff done. And the stuff they were getting done was hurting us, hurting the world and hurting our future. So there had to be a response to that. So it was to try to put an organisation on the floor in Australia to show up. You know the expression that 50% of winning is turning up? We weren't even turning up, right? And now we're starting to turn up, and the difference is already being felt. So I'm really glad that around the world, organisations are being created and starting to turn up. It's incredible what a difference the mere presence of a different voice on that subject makes. So that's why we did it.
We have another question here. At the time, first, one quick yes/no question for you guys. Do you think that the traditional big environmental NGOs are ever going to root for nuclear power? Yes, no, yes, yes.
Yes, they will. And but the way that we'll get there is the way that the secret to successful campaigning is to not embarrass anybody. Actually, it's to create a safe space that allows everyone to come in. Doing it the hard way is trying to prove how wrong somebody else is, because all that does, and we know this from psychology, we know that all that does is it can backfire, it can really deepen the original belief that you're trying to persuade people out of, because humans are really good at subconsciously arguing against something that they don't already believe, when they hear something that they don't already believe. So you can actually further entrench positions by and further polarize. So the environmental NGOs, we have a huge amount in common, all of us. We all care about the same stuff, right? We care about solving climate change, we care about protecting nature, we care about well-being for humans and wildlife and nature. And that's the stuff that we basically need to start focusing on.
I rarely disagree with Kirsty. I'm going to disagree. I think mostly no. I think they will mostly shrink and contract in a downward spiral of extremism on being anti-nuclear as more and more people come to realise that it should be there. And that's what we've observed with some organisations in Australia, is that as they lose more moderate members, instead of moderating to win the members back, they become guided by the more extreme people who remain. So no, I don't. I see the leadership in those organisations as having too much to lose, far too invested, just too big. They're just like big companies with big incomes and big balance sheets, and on the whole, not. I think we will see. I more understand in Australia, particularly conservation-based NGOs could come on board. The NGOs that really are about looking after land, forest, wildlife, they can really see that energy was never really their battle. Or if it was, it would be that they wouldn't want that hydro flooding, or they wouldn't want that biomass. I don't ever see Greenpeace changing, for example, ever. I actually think that the approach for them is to inflict pain and make them hurt. And I think for too long this has been a painless experience for them. Lying has been painless, and that has to change.
I'm trying not to duck out the question. I'm more positive, I think most will be. I think it's more important is having a positive engagement. Whether someone is agree with you or not, I think is not, in my view, not the main issue here. Because at the moment, we are not even having the conversation. So it's having a shared common goal and engaging in that, and both sides in the position in the engagement are willing listen and in the position potentially to change as well.
I've got to respond to you, Ben, because all right. But it's just such a kind of simple characterization of a kind of an entity, instead of understanding that human beings are actually in those organizations. And you know and I know and we all know that when we're sitting in the bar talking to the directors of policy, directors of the scientific advisors, the researchers, the chief executives of all of those organizations that are branded as being anti-nuclear, and they act like they're anti-nuclear, they know that we need nuclear, and they know that a lot of the stuff that is out there, all of the misinformation and propaganda is not true, but they're trapped. So what do? Do you just decide, oh, well, we're just going to try and destroy you and throw rocks at you when they're multi-million-dollar organizations, they're hugely powerful with millions of members, and we're going to take them on? Or do you try and think about a sophisticated strategy to get them out of their trap?
This sounds like a long discussion we have on lunch. Then with Jukka and Raul, it's just thumbs up or down. Let's just count the votes and take the next
Some yes, some not.
Okay, so half and half?
Yeah, it depends on the organization and the people. Like, I agree with both of them.
Okay, so this remains unresolved at the moment. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Esa Tommila. I'm a former CEO of Ecochem Limited, hazardous waste and other waste treatment and utilization company, senior citizen. I have a hint to you. At first, I strongly support this positive attitude which we are just talking about. But in spite of that, it's sometimes useful to remind the public and the renewable energy industry that hardly any of the renewables really are carbon-free. Most of them produce carbon indirectly in the long chain of the production or in distribution. And a good or bad example of that is the German Energiewende. Now, after 6 years, they have used some 520 billion euros for it. And as we saw, the carbon emissions still stay as they are. Basic reason is that all the hundreds of coal power plants are needed for the backup electricity of the renewable photovoltaic and wind power. And Germans are just surprised, how did it go this way? We could perhaps help them to see the entity in a broader context.
Thanks.
Just a
comment?
Quick comment, yeah. Maybe I was in Germany a couple of weeks ago doing research on how they see the Energiewende, how they see nuclear, how they see renewables, and met with some interesting people there. And basically, I think, and they think, that it's too late for Germany to make another Energiewende to some other direction. But maybe the main message was to use us as an example on how not to proceed in decarbonizing energy. And and make the rest of the world, and because they are exporting their policies aggressively to other countries in Europe and even in the United States, they are being used as a glaring good example on how to do energy policy, and that needs to change. That we need to sort of show the failures and the reasons behind the failures. But I'm not sure if we should offer them a safe space or beat them up or what. I guess that depends.
Okay. Jukka, go ahead.
If I may comment shortly, first of all, we should not consider that solar and wind are or will be what they were 10 or 20 years ago. So there's a huge development in these generation forms that must be respected. They are also very good tools to achieve the same goals. So we should not put these carbon neutral forms of generation against each other.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think the main focus is stop burning fossil fuel. That's first objective. So we do need all low carbon sources working together at this stage and potentially invest. I mean, later on is, I think Dieter Helm, one of the professors, he says that we know actually all current technology won't lead to decarbonization. So we need some additional energy. So it makes a strange argument that we've got existing technology and we're not going to deploying it.
It is a dilemma about, do you build today? Do you build a technology today that's not perfect? And we've just had an amazing example of this in the UK, where offshore wind has halved in price in the space of 5 years, and they've achieved that through a myriad of innovations. The turbines now are so huge, so much bigger, so much more, producing so much more power than than the ones that they were building just 5 years ago were, and so much more cheaply. So you do need to build in order to innovate, in order to drive down costs. And with Germany, unfortunately, their incredibly ambitious program has been very distorted by their decision to also phase out nuclear at the same time as building, the world's most ambitious program of renewable energy.
Oh yeah, all I'd add is I'd agree. It's the simplest principle, and it's the way that we always prevail in a discussion or a debate, is that no one here is anti-renewable at all. Like it was never my position, never my platform. The only message we're trying to get across is it's bigger than that, it's harder than that, we need more than that. And when we looked at what wind and solar was going to be installed in Australia by 2035, it's a lot. And what's left behind, because we have so much coal, we might as well just run Australia on gas. Honestly, what would be left behind would be at about 370 grams per kilowatt hour, even with all of this wind and all of this solar, which is about the same as running a combined cycle gas plant. So that's where we need to turn around and say, what was the reason for having this wind and solar in the first place? It was to do better than fossil fuels, not to end up about the same. So what are we going to do with the rest of it? And that is somewhere where occupying the centre of the discussion is something that is very, very easy to do in clean energy by saying we just want to use all the available technology. And when you are neatly occupying the centre of a discussion, you become very appealing to the general public, that there seems to be someone that is actually trying to tackle the issue rather than promote a solution in its own right.
Right, thank you. We're kind of due to lunch already, but let's have one short question still from the audience, and hopefully quite short answers too.
So, since we're being pluralist and inclusive here, I'd just like to point out that fossil fuels aren't really the enemy. Carbon emissions are the problem. And, coming from the, fossil fuel powerhouse of the United States, it's really not feasible to have even a coalition between renewables and nuclear there without figuring out some way to include coal and gas, but without emissions. And so while it was a very amusing operatic beginning, and while, we're saying that burning fossil fuels is the problem, it's really carbon emissions that are the problem. And one of the things I often start my talks by saying is, it's the carbon emissions, stupid. Let's focus on the problem which we're trying to reduce, and not the technologies, and not not to say that we don't need more renewables and a lot more nuclear. Of course, that's why I'm here. But we can solve a lot of this with new technologies for decarbonizing fossil fuels. And that, I think, has to be an option that we look at. So,
in principle, I agree fully. It's one reason I now even struggle with the term decarbonization. Carbon is not my enemy. Fossil carbon emissions are my enemy. Where does the carbon come from and where is it going is the question. I agree in principle. With the coal sector in particular, though, they absolutely have to wear that responsibility of covering that cost. This is not a surprise issue. And the R&D in the coal industry as a percentage of profits is miserable. Compared to pharmaceuticals, compared to motor vehicles, they've invested nothing in solving their own problem and staying part of the 21st century. So if they want in, fine, but they've got to be prepared to pay and compete if they want in on that discussion. And as pluralist as I want to be, we would really be checking our morals at the door if we just sort of wave them in the name of pluralism. No, we have a problem to solve. So if they're prepared to stump up the R&D and actually cover the cost, fine. It's a lot easier with gas. But coal, well, they have to solve that problem. They can't have reaped profits for hundreds of years and then turn around and expect the taxpayer to fund their research and development to clean up their energy source. No.
Yep.
Great. This is not a competition. Think about it as the energy system, the whole system, and don't confuse the means with the end, because that's what the 100% renewables goal seems to me to be doing. It's like the renewables is not the end. The clean energy system is the end that we're looking for here.
I'm not going to try and answer that question, but I think we have to move debate about energy source, energy production, as well as electricity, but energy. But for electricity, the grid will be very different in the future with renewables. So I think we also have to talk about how does the new system will operate and where does the use, demand, and where the generation going to come from and so forth. And I think that's probably more important for the general public to understand the magnitude of change and lifestyle change and technology change that will be required for the future, as well as where the electricity going to be coming from.
Well, totally agree. It's the climate change that we are tackling here. Energy has a big stake in that. With the existing energy mix, I believe that I remember that only 1 or 2% of existing overall primary energy in the world is solar and wind combined. So and still the need of energy is increasing. So we need to absolutely to use all possible ways in solving that problem. And there are huge amounts of fossil fuels left, so it's obvious that they have some value, and the disvalue is, or the bad thing is of course the emissions, and we need to tackle that. All this is needed for sure, but the carbon neutral energy system is really the what is needed now.
For me, anything that works is okay. Now we're gonna get lunch.
Yeah. Let's give a big hand to all of our presenters and panelists. And next up, our MC Lauri is gonna give some introductions and maybe sum up a bit for the morning session.
Sure. Thank you for all the speakers and thank you for the audience. I think I can sum the whole discussion up in a text that would fit into one tweet. Electricity first, make energy clean again. Germany, so sad, so sad. In any case, thank you for all the speakers and the audience. The lunch is served in a sort of conference room at the other end of the hotel. So if you just walk up the ramp on the left and keep on walking and follow the smells. So we will meet here around 12 o'clock. We will try to start at 12, but if you have your table full, your plate full of food, don't rush in. We can wait for a few minutes. So. Okay, thank you very much.